Good evening. Hello. I'm Tom Cochran, the CEO and Executive Director of the United States Conference of Mayors. We're located in Washington, D.C., and we're so pleased to be here tonight. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in our cities and also to discuss what public service is today. And if you're in college or a young person and you are thinking about public service, cities and city halls is where it's happening. I live in Washington. It's good to be out of Washington and to be in a dynamic city like New York City. But throughout our country, there's great changes going on with young people at the high school level, at the college level, and we are very pleased that the mayors are welcoming the students to be more involved with us. We will announce soon a new task force on youth involvement, which means that we will be bringing mayors and City Hall even closer together. The mayors that we have tonight are outstanding mayors. Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, who has been very active with the conference. She has an opioid crisis in Ohio that surpasses many states. We have also tonight the Mayor of Mesa, Arizona, Mayor Giles, and from South Bend, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. And if you can't pronounce his last name, you just say Mayor Pete, and he knows. Also up the road, a great mayor from New Haven, Toni Harp. All of these mayors are very active with the 1,400 mayors that are part of our organization. We also want to thank two other co-sponsors, the Robert Wagner School of Public Affairs. This man, Robert Wagner, was the mayor of this city, and this school is named after him. He was a past president of our organization, very active with us. And also the David Bohnett Foundation, who has been very, very supportive of NYU's program, providing scholarships to young people, and myself and Tom McClyman, who is here tonight, and I have been involved in the selection of those scholars. So I again welcome you on behalf of the nation mayors for this event, and it is now my pleasure to introduce David Bohnett, a true friend of cities and progressive issues. It's very important to have people like David Bohnett who are very involved with arts, gay and lesbian rights, and progressive issues in our cities. And so we appreciate again the Bohnett Fellows Program, and we want to say thank you, David, and I will now present him, and we look forward to having a great evening tonight, listening to some of the most dynamic mayors in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. And thank you to Gordon Campbell and Dean Gleed, who can't be here tonight, and your team at NYU's Wagner School for inviting us to participate in this important conversation with you and all of our distinguished mayors. As I was riding the subway down here today, it reminded me of growing up in the suburbs of Chicago and how I loved taking the train into the city. As much as I appreciated my own suburban community, I knew that the city was the place where the excitement was, where the energy was, where the smartest people with the biggest ideas would shape the future, and where my future was. When I headed off to college, I chose the University of Southern California, smack dab in the middle of Los Angeles, in a true urban campus that embraces all that the City of Angels has to offer. Having lived in Los Angeles for over 40 years, it's thrilling to see the dramatic urban renaissance happening in downtown, Hollywood, and other parts of the city. The moniker DTLA, a nickname for downtown Los Angeles, was added to the Urban Dictionary just over 8 years ago and is a remarkable indication of the renewal in housing, entertainment, and commerce in downtown Los Angeles. When it came to start my career and eventually start my internet company, geocities.com, over 20 years ago, I was proud to be in the vanguard of the tech boom in Los Angeles and to be an early pioneer in Silicon Beach. And now I'm lucky enough to have homes in two terrific cities, LA and New York, and I get to enjoy all that these cities have to offer with cultural arts and other thrilling and exciting activities. As a matter of fact, mass transit growing in Los Angeles, and rode the subway here this morning, and I rode my city bike around Central Park earlier today. It seems appropriate that we're having a conversation tonight about urban transformation at a school named for a true urban transformer, Mayor Robert Wagner. During Wagner's tenure as New York City's mayor, he built public housing and schools, created the City University of New York, established the right of collective bargaining for city employees, barred housing discrimination based on race, creed, or color. He was the first mayor to hire significant numbers of people of color in city government. His administration also saw the development of Lincoln Center, brought Shakespeare to Central Park. He reappointed Robert Moses to the Planning Commission and undertook major investments in the city's mass transit system. Over the past decade, my foundation has invested nearly $5 million in the David Bohnett Mayoral Fellows Program here at NYU Wagner and sister programs at UCLA and the University of Michigan. This signature program has provided graduate school tuition to nearly 100 master's degree students who, in addition to their academic work, are placed working in the office of the mayors of New York, Los Angeles, and Detroit on substantive policy issues. And what I am most proud of is that nearly all these students have remained in public service to this day. And for the last 3 years, we have partnered with Tom and his team at the U.S. Conference of Mayors to provide them with a summer Bohnett Fellow, intern from UCLA, NYU, or the University of Michigan, to work on the critical work of the conference and its members and mayors from coast to coast. A lot has changed since Mayor Wagner, but the power of a mayor to be an agent of transformation has not. That's why NYU Wagner trains the next generation, why I invest in them, and why you and your fellow mayors are here today. The columnist Herb Caen once wrote, "A city is not gauged by its length and width, but by the broadness of its vision and the height of its dreams." Thank you all for participating today. We have an exciting panel to follow, and I'm proud to be part of this program. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thanks to the David Bohnett Foundation, and thanks to Tom Cochran and Tom McClyman and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It has and continues to be a great partnership with our three respective organizations. My name is Gordon Campbell, and I'm a professor of practice at NYU Wagner School of Public Service. And on behalf of NYU Wagner, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you to tonight's forum. At NYU Wagner, we have a long history in public service, both here in New York City and around the globe. Being embedded in New York, we infuse an urban perspective into everything we teach our students. Take almost any public service issue, affordable health care, education disparities, transportation infrastructure, or poverty, and you'll find cities grappling with it, not only here in the United States, but literally around the world. But our urban character derives not only from our location, but from our scholarly strength. We recently helped launch NYU's Urban Initiative, which brings together faculty from across academic fields and NYU schools and institutes to work together on urban issues. This semester, we welcome Syracuse Mayor Stephanie Miner as a visiting distinguished urbanist, in which she will teach a course, meet with students, and participate in campus events on public policy. And 3 of our faculty and scholars recently published books on urban challenges and innovations. We know that in order for our students to drive positive change in their community, they must have a deeper understanding of the urban context. And that's why this evening's conversation is so important. We are live streaming tonight's forum, so I welcome those of you joining us online. We're glad you're taking part virtually. NYU Wagner and our co-sponsors all agreed a vital part of the forum would be hearing from you, the audience. There are 2 ways you can take part in tonight's conversation and ask questions, 1 via Twitter or 2 via the old-fashioned index cards. For Twitter, submit a question using the hashtag #ChangingCities, which you'll see in your programs and on the screen. The second way is to ask a question is by writing it on an index card. Simply raise your hand at any time during the debate and discussion, and an usher will pick it up from you. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Eleanor Randolph. She was a recent visiting scholar at NYU Wagner. Eleanor is a longtime journalist, contributing writer, covering national politics and the media for the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the New York Times. She was a former editorial board member of the New York Times, and she's currently writing a biography of Michael Bloomberg. Please join me in welcoming Eleanor Randolph. Thank you. I know, you like that.
Hello and welcome to the audiences in the hall and the people connected by the magic of the internet. We have an opportunity to hear from 4 mayors who have made a difference in their cities, and I'd advise you to remember their names because they will certainly continue to make news, good news, going forward. If you'll grant me a point of personal privilege, I am working on this book on Michael Bloomberg, and as I say to everybody, this is my advice. If you're going to write a biography, do not write a biography about somebody who's still alive. And he keeps moving. Anyway, one of the things that I wanted to borrow from him was he gave a speech in 2012 as he left City Hall that I thought was really important about the power of cities. And as you probably know, he's a big believer in the way cities can change the future, even if we're not getting much change in Washington. Anyway, the first thing he said was the age of the suburb is over, which made a lot of people happy. And then he said that by mid-century, nearly 70% of the human race will live in cities around the world. And finally, the most important thing that I thought he said in this speech was that, historically states were known as the laboratories for democracy. Now the laboratories are in these cities where these and other mayors are solving problems and meeting the people whose problems need to be solved at the coffee shop, on the street. They're not protected by a wall of either reporters or public relations agents. They are right out there. And so I want to give you just a little bit about the format. We're going to talk about some big subjects, and I'm afraid we'll never have enough time to talk about some of these subjects. But each mayor will speak for 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes, and then the mayors will comment. And then we have on Twitter, #ChangingCities. You can pose a question, we'll get it. And then the audience can submit questions. There'll be 3x5 cards being passed out if you wanted to ask a question. Now, let's welcome to the stage our 4 star mayors. Our first mayor is Nan Whaley, and she is the mayor of Dayton, Ohio, and she says her job is a labor of love, which I love, and she's going to speak to us about the opioid crisis.
Well, Eleanor, thanks for moderating this great panel, and it's a great pleasure to be with mayors that I so adore. I think one of the best things about being a mayor is actually getting to hang out and learn from other mayors across the country. I think mayors are actually the most interesting people in politics, mostly because they have to get stuff done. They don't have much time for any kind of really extremism. They just have to be pretty pragmatic, and it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues, and appreciate the Conference of Mayors for inviting me to New York. I'm the mayor of Dayton. I've been the mayor for this is my 5th year. Dayton is a city about an hour north of Cincinnati. It's about 145,000 people. The county's around 560,000 people. And when I was elected mayor, Dayton has seen some pretty extreme change through this economy, particularly with the change in manufacturing and automation, but also a pretty specific issue that I didn't really know I was going to have to deal with so heavily when I was elected in 2014 was the opioid epidemic. And I like to say that, you know, these start basically first with a story. And the first time I heard really about someone dying from heroin was in 2008. I'm from Indiana originally and and moved to Dayton. And my mother called me to tell me that a little boy that I used to babysit, who had grown up into his 20s, I babysat him when he was 5 and I was 13, had died from a heroin overdose. And I remember thinking, I've never heard anyone, you know, dying from heroin, and how could that be? I remember him being so full of life, and I was really inconsolable for a month after that. I couldn't even get my head around it. And then, you know, I thought, gosh, this is just something so out of the ordinary. And really, what I found was it really was the tip of the spear. In Dayton last year, we saw some of the worst numbers that we've ever experienced in accidental overdose deaths in the county. We had 563 people die from accidental overdose. And really, as you started to dig into the issue, we found that people start, particularly with prescription pain relievers. Their doctors say, hey, this isn't addictive. And when you're using a when you get a prescription from your doctor, typically in the early 2000s, you're always told to finish the prescription. And that's really the worst thing you can do for a pain reliever. And folks were getting addicted to opioids that way. When pill mills in Southern Ohio left, they had to move to something else because they were still addicted, and that's when heroin moved in. So it has been a huge challenge for our community. We've done everything from harm reduction, one of the first cities in the state, if not country, to declare an emergency in 2014. We distributed around 125,000 needles for harm reduction just last year in our community. 13,700 doses of Narcan delivered by our police and fire units, and just an extreme amount of costs. Our county spent $10 million to treat 2,500 people in 2016 for this addiction. They only treated 1,000 people for addiction and alcoholism. So the spread is very serious. So as mayor, you have to take action. And so we were one of the first cities in the country, in addition to declaring an emergency last June, we wanted to hold the drug companies accountable. We sued the drug companies, the manufacturers, the distributors, and actually doctors that started this mess. We were the 4th city in the country. The first was Chicago. I have to say that so Mayor Emanuel won't get upset. He was the first. And he's not here, but still, I'm sure he keeps track of everything that's said about Chicago. And to date, over 400 cities. We sued on June 8th. 10 months later, over 400 communities across the country have joined. Not our suit, but moved on. So
you also wanted to tax.
Yes.
What was it? A nickel a pill.
Yes. When I was actually in the governor's race earlier, I called for a surcharge on a nickel a dose for each prescription pain reliever. Really, you shouldn't be on pain relievers very long, and that dose we could use to actually pay for the treatment and recovery. Recovery takes around 5 years for addiction, and as I was saying to some of the mayors earlier, we really when people say, what is the bottom of this for Dayton and other communities that's hit by this, I really want us to start treating addiction like the disease that it is. And that's something we can get done now in Dayton, unfortunately, because it has affected every single family, and every single person knows someone who's overdosed or who's accidentally died in our community. And so that really changes the conversation around criminal justice. It changes the conversation around how we treat addiction, and it gives us the opportunity to really get this science right, something that we're woefully behind in this country. So,
Mayors, what do you think?
Well, with apologies to Mayor Emanuel, I figured out that it was a good idea to consider suing the opioid makers after hearing that Nan Whaley was doing it in Dayton. I think the analogy, mayors love stealing ideas from each other.
Yes. I steal all of Pete's too.
I mean, the analogy that's been offered is that of the tobacco companies, and I think what's really interesting strategically is you have a lot of different players involved, the doctors, the distributors, and the makers. Our approach hasn't focused on the doctors as much, largely because we found kind of independently, partly, unfortunately, because a doctor in our community was killed by somebody who was kind of strung out due to addiction, that there was a crisis of conscience among the doctors. One of them realized, he just did the mental math about the statistics on addiction, on overdose death, and the number of patients he'd seen, and he said, statistically, chances are an overdose began with a prescription that I wrote. And so they've come together. But what's very clear is the ways in which the distributors and the makers have taken some very irresponsible steps, and now we're left picking it up. The other thing that I think we're dealing with in our community that has been a challenge is as we move to, I think, a more enlightened attitude on opioid addiction, understanding it is a medical issue and not a moral failing.
That's right.
There are a lot of people in the African American community who are rightly asking us, that's great, where were you in the 80s and 90s with your enlightened attitude when the crack epidemic was going on? We have an issue right now that's affecting the black community a lot that is not on the radar very much, to my surprise, which is this synthetic marijuana, so-called synthetic marijuana, synthetic cannabinoids. It's got nothing to do with marijuana. You're way better off with actual marijuana than this stuff. It can be lethal. It's not even a question of overdose. I mean, it's almost toxic from the outset. And people think it's legal because they can change the chemical compositions of the stuff almost on a daily basis as it's shipped in. So this is in many ways, I think, scraping the surface of a whole spectrum of harms, but certainly Mayor Whaley's leadership in Dayton has been something a lot of us have taken note of, and it's given us a way not to feel helpless in the face of these challenges.
Obviously we could spend all of our time talking about this one issue, but the next mayor is Mayor John Giles of Mesa, Arizona, city of about 485,000, would that be about right? A lawyer, and he was born and raised in Mesa, and he's been mayor since 2014. Mayor Giles is a rare example of a politician who is, I would say, an independent thinker. He's a Republican, but he supports NAFTA, and he wants his party to deal with DACA and to allow these children to stay in this country. He can speak with authority about the immigration problems in this country. You have 5 minutes to deal with one of the biggest topics.
Sure. If Nan can, solve the opioid epidemic in 5 minutes, maybe I'll take a crack at immigration. But I think whether it's opioids or immigration, I think this is a great example of where you see local government is where these problems are being addressed at a far more effective level than at the national level. It's sad, but on the opioid problem, more and more people, their primary caregiver is my emergency response department. And that's not as it should be. And I haven't gotten to immigration yet, but a couple of years ago, we changed the name of our fire department to the Mesa Fire and Medical Department to better reflect the services that we were providing. A week ago, we had our police chief come in and talking about the opioids and other issues, and I made the comment, and it wasn't a joke, do we need to change the name to the Mesa Fire and Mental Health Department? Right. Because nearly, as I go on ride-alongs with our public safety folks, nearly everything that we go on has at its root cause something tied to mental health, whether it's addiction or some other form of mental health issue. But immigration is another great topic. And again, you might ask, why did you bring, if you're bringing somebody in from Arizona to talk about immigration, why is it not Jeff Flake or John McCain or somebody who actually deals with the issue? Well, just like with opioids, I would suggest to you that really where this issue is being dealt with is at the local level, far more effectively and in a far more meaningful way than at the national level. Folks don't move to America, they move to neighborhoods and they move to cities, and they are integrated into our communities. And so NAFTA is, and DACA are issues kind of conceptually that get talked about in Washington, D.C., but they are people's lives, and they are people that we shop with and go to church with, and that our children go to school with at the local level. So we are far more motivated, I think, to try to find some sort of a solution.
You're not a sanctuary city, are you?
Mesa is not. Mesa and well, Arizona generally is a conservative state, and Mesa has been labeled, frankly, the most conservative large city in the United States. I don't know that I agree with that, but there have been a couple of different major publications that have given us that label. So it's an interesting environment. A third of my community is Hispanic, and a lot of those are immigrants. We don't have a real good handle on what percentage are undocumented, but it's significant. And so that's the kind of awkward environment that we're in. It's politically conservative, but immigration issues are front and center.
Well, how will the census affect you if they ask for citizenship?
Boy, we've all got our fingers crossed, and this is an issue for all of our communities. It's no secret that the Trump administration has added a
Big difference.
I was reminiscing, I guess, wishfully.
Yeah.
But
You and me,
no question, the immigration question is going to have a chilling effect on our turnout, and we're very concerned about that. Mesa is a very fast-growing city. We are very dependent on having accurate census numbers. A couple of years ago, we participated in the trial census, and we moved from 38th to 36th largest city in the country. We don't care what number we are, but we do care about how many dollars we get from our state government, because we use shared revenue is tied to population, as is congressional representation. So there's no question it's going to have a chilling effect, and it's going to make it very difficult. Even without that issue, it's difficult to get an accurate count in your community. But when you are, particularly where you're asking a community, think of the DACA situation. A few years ago, we asked these folks to please trust us and to come out of the shadows and to share their information with us in hopes of integrating into our community and being able to participate and experience the American dream. That did not turn out very well for those folks who trusted the government in that context. And now here we are back at the door saying, hey, I'm from the government, I want to ask about your immigration status. Why in the world would they trust us and do that? So in spite of that hurdle, we have to do our best to have a meaningful census. And so we are, in my community in particular, we're working very, very hard. I was in church last Sunday in a Spanish-speaking, predominantly immigrant congregation, again, asking them to be a part of our community. And it's going to take a lot of outreach like that from the mayor and everyone else to try to have a meaningful census in our community.
That's good.
And I think, too, just to talk about the census a little more, I think the conference and Mayor Giles' leadership around this issue on the citizenship question is something that has really taken over the mayor's conversations at every meeting that we have. And secondly, there's a lot of issues with the census in addition to the citizenship question, which I'm almost to the point we should all just tell everybody to skip that question, regardless, in solidarity, just skip the citizenship question, because what are they going to do? We can all fill it out. Let's not fill out that question. So I think that that's something we should talk about. But I also feel that the issue as you look at what the Obama administration did to really invest in the count compared to the Trump administration's cuts on this is going to have significant effects in a lot of our communities. And in rural areas as well, it is all non-paper. And you get to southeastern Ohio, they don't have broadband, to figure out who's going to be going door to door in these communities to count is going to be an issue both for rural and urban areas. So there's a lot of issues around the census coming up in 2020.
Absolutely. And then the overall attitudes that have been expressed from the administration have caused us some financial and economic concern. Mesa's biggest trading partner is the country of Mexico. And we are very excited. We've been working for years, sending delegations to Mexico City, all over. And we're on the cusp of launching a big event in our city where we're going to become the launching point for taking e-commerce into Mexico. We're an inland port. We have worked out all kinds of special arrangements with U.S. Customs and Border Patrol to do this. And on each trip that I take to promote this project, the first part of every meeting is spent apologizing and working on relationships and assuring people that on an individual and on a local government level that we are very anxious to engage with Mexico. And so that's another reason. I mean, there's good reasons to be pro immigration reform, but there's also very selfish reasons it's good for our economy coming from a border state, I can tell you.
It's good for the economy in New York as well.
I'm sure.
The other cities. So, anybody else have a quick comment on immigration? I guess quick comment doesn't really work in this. Now we're going to hear from Mayor Toni Harp of New Haven, a city of about 130,000 people. It's known for its art and for its ancient elms and for, you know, a ton of Yale students. And Mayor Harp was elected in 2013, and she was reelected last year by a 3-1 vote, which is pretty astonishing. Well done. Her main issues are education and crime. How is it that the crime rate is down in New Haven? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. New Haven, as you heard, is a city of Yale students, but it's also a city of newcomers. And so we've had people who come to our city, they want to feel safe in our city. And just like every other urban place in America, we've been confronted with street crime, with drug crime. And when I first became mayor in 2014, I was inaugurated, but that winter of 13, right after the election, there were 4 young people who were killed in my town. And so the first thing that I had to do officially was go to funerals of young people. And one of the things that we had started doing about 20 years prior to my becoming mayor is community-based policing. And you know, there's a lot of discussion about whether or not that works, but so we'd had different police chiefs who would do it, some would do it well, some wouldn't do it at all, and just were opposed to it. So we started back doing very vigilant community-based policing with community management teams who worked with the same officers who walked the beat, who got to know people in the community. And that started to reduce crime. That was one of the things that we did. The other thing that we did, there's a technology called ShotSpotter. And what that does is if a bullet is fired, there is an antenna that triangulates the bullet. You can identify within 5 feet where the shot was fired. It automatically calls the police, because if you live in a neighborhood where people have been hearing gunfire for years, they stop calling the police. And it makes it that much harder for the police to get to the bottom of that particular crime. So within 1 minute, ShotSpotter scrub that bullet and it's called the police and they're there on the scene. So that community-based policing. But the other thing that I noticed, I was a state senator for about 21 years. And
yes, you were the conscience of the Senate.
Well, some thought that. So one of the things that every single superintendent for the past 30 years had told me, that when a young person had been killed, I could have told you that that young person was going to be killed. I could have told you that young person would be a shooter. And so when I was finally mayor, I said, well, okay, when that superintendent told me the exact same thing, I said, well, who's next? And how do we identify who's next? And so he couldn't tell me, but he could say that there were certain characteristics that these young people would have, that they would be overage undercredited, that they will be returning from the juvenile justice system, that they would be disruptive in school. Long story short, what we did was we identified these young people. We discovered there are about 600 of them in our community. And then we went door to door and met with the parents, and we said, do you think your child is going to be in trouble, is going to do something? We were actually able to remove a couple of kids from our community. But what we've done is build programming around those 600 kids, and since we call it Community Youth Stat, since we've done that, we've lost 1 in 3 years, when we had lost many over time. We have another program called Project Longevity, and we identify the gangs, we call them in, we tell them we know who you are. If you need help getting out, we'll help you get out. If your family needs help, we'll help you. Long story short, our numbers are really good. Our homicides have gone down since 2011 by 75%. Our non-fatal shooting victims have gone down by 56%, and our shots fired have gone down by 72.4%. So we think we're onto something.
Comments?
Well, I just like to point out this is what's going on in cities. Quite often, the rhetoric that comes out of Washington is that cities are deteriorating and that crime is getting worse in cities. And I'm sure there's examples of...
There is a voice that keeps saying that.
Yes. But
Administration again.
yeah, and I'm not here to attack the administration, but the truth is that crime is down in my community.
Mine too.
Crime is nationally down, and the work that's being done to accomplish that is occurring at the city level. So
right.
there's a good story to talk about the crime statistics in the United States and in big cities.
Well, I think that's really true. We're seeing that. So we have a cognitive dissonance with that message because we're seeing it when we count the numbers. And something that we're all obsessed with as mayors is data. We had double-digit crime numbers drop year over year, even while we're going through this epidemic, which you would think would not be the case. So I think most cities are seeing this, and it's because we're, again, stealing good ideas like Mayor Harp has and continuing to follow the data, which I think makes a big difference on this issue.
And I think it's connected as well to immigration because you can't make a community feel safe if they think that
That's
you're
right.
going to be coming after them and removing them from the country.
That's right.
They're not going to work with you.
I've got a great police chief. I referenced him earlier. He grew up on both sides of the border. He's very sensitive to the immigration issue and how it impacts crime. And he is famous for saying immigrants make great crime victims. And that's horribly true. And so our mission is to instill trust in them and get them out from a situation where they are so easily victimized. Yeah.
So finally we meet Pete Buttigieg. He's known, you can understand this, he's known as Mayor Pete in South Bend, Indiana. He's got quite a 5-star resume. He was a businessman. While he was mayor, he went to Afghanistan and helped out as an intelligence officer. He has a degree from Harvard, and he was a Rhodes Scholar, and there are always rumblings that he may be aiming for higher things. And he really wants to make South Bend a futuristic city, if you will. And so what he's going to talk to us about is artificial intelligence. I love it. We need all the intelligence we can get at this point, so artificial or not. So.
Well, thank you. First of all, I just want to say that South Bend is really takes a lot of pride in NYU because John Bradamus, before he was the transformational president here, was a member of Congress from South Bend for about 20, 25 years. And I still remember him taking me to the library here and showing me his proudest artifact, which is the Nixon enemies list with his name on it. So it's really exciting to be here. But yeah, I was interested in talking about artificial intelligence and automation more broadly because it's such an important story, I think, of where a community like ours is headed. I should start by stating that we're not the sort of tidy, wealthy, racially homogenous community you might expect to be next to Notre Dame in Indiana. Our per capita personal income is a little under $20,000. We are a racially diverse city, and we've been through a lot of the same kind of patterns you would see in other parts of the industrial Midwest, because we were a company town really for an automaker, Studebaker, and spent the 50 years after it closed in 1963 figuring out what our future was going to be. So we've done a lot of thinking about how a community like that creates a future in a globalized, connected, and increasingly automated world. We're launching a task force at the U.S. Conference of Mayors on these same questions related to automation because it feels, at least from my perspective, as a community that's really been to the brink and back from these economic shocks, that this is much like what was happening in the 1990s, the combination of trade and automation and what that did to our industrial towns, except that we see this one coming. And so it means there's really no excuse for us to not to prepare a response. What I think is interesting for the perspective of mayors is how many different layers we're dealing with automation. So first we deal with it really at the enterprise level as customers. So a simple example is that I've got trash trucks now that have a robotic arm that automatically empties the bins. It means there's one less picker who has to go out on a crew, and it allows us to keep our trash pickup costs under control. There are going to be a lot of different examples, especially around fleet, where you're going to see more and more of this happening. It's also artificial intelligence that allows me to boast that we have the world's smartest sewers, a system of sensors throughout the network that's...
You've managed to move all of them to the cloud, I hear.
That's right, yeah. First city in the world to put our sewer management on the cloud. I know this isn't the sexiest topic, but it's a big deal. It's worth probably hundreds of millions of dollars in avoided capital expenditure by optimizing our system. So applications like that really serve us well. The next level that I think is interesting is as policymakers making decisions today where the answer might change within the lifetime of today's decision. So for example, so many compelling development projects live or die based on whether we can come up with enough surface parking as called for by the zoning code. Surface parking may not be as big of a thing in 10 years if Uber-style vehicles without drivers are picking people up and they start being less and less likely to own a vehicle in the first place. So planning decisions, land use decisions are likely to change. The third level that's very significant, this is probably the one that gets a little more attention around automation, is we are all making policy for economies that are going to shift. And nobody really knows what those shifts are going to be. Famously, the invention of the ATM indirectly led to an increase in the number of people in frontline retail banking positions in employment. So it's not an obvious loss of jobs all the time, but it could be. And so we've got to make sure that we're making the right economic decisions to cushion our communities for the changes that are happening in the future of work. And fourth, and this will sound a little bit far out, but I would argue there's almost a spiritual level at which we've got to be confronting what automation is doing to the future of work. And that's because in the coming years, I mean, coming from a generation that's going to change careers more frequently than my parents' generation changed jobs, we already know that a job is less likely to be the source of lifelong community identity and purpose than it has been historically. This, I think, is contributing to crises of purpose that may even help to explain things like the opioid epidemic. And yet the solution to these crises of purpose, if you're not going to get the same sense of purpose and meaning from your job that you used to, community itself might actually be the answer. There's an increasing number of people in South Bend who play very important roles in the community as artists, creators, activists, that they're on my radar because as a mayor they're significant enough that I see them all the time, and then I stop and think and I have no idea what their day jobs are. I know they have day jobs, but that's not who they are in the community isn't based on that, the way most of us at a cocktail party identify ourselves. I make it sound like I go to a lot of cocktail parties now, but you know, that's how the first question, right, in small talk is what do you do? And what if what do you do is different from where do you work? I think even that is something that mayors should pay attention to because we might be presiding over communities that furnish the very answer to that puzzle.
Wow, you can see why he did a TED Talk if some of you want to look that one up. You know, artificial intelligence is one of the things that we talk about a lot, and you talked about it a little bit, are these self-driving cars. And I know that Mesa's done some work in that area. I would like to ask, I guess, what are really stupid questions. That's part of my job. And one of them is, if you are in a self-driving car, can you drink? That's one. And,
Probably.
and the other one is, what if somebody hacks your self-driving car and takes you, say, to your mother-in-law's house instead of where you want to go?
Yeah, the answer to those questions are, I don't know, and I don't know.
Oh, no.
But actually the question, I did have a great meeting with the folks from Alphabet who are leading the autonomous vehicle technology throughout the world, but you're right, Mesa and Tempe in Arizona are, a lot of this is going on there. And I said, wow, this is an exciting, innovative business that you're bringing to my community. What can I do to help you? You know, do I need to tweak our regulations or do something? And they said, no, The reason we are here is because of the absence of regulations. And so the thing that we want you to do is nothing.
Don't do anything.
Yes. And so a lot of these issues that you raise, the answer is there is no local or state regulation that addresses those questions, and that's why we're an attractive environment for them to come and do their testing.
I think that's the concern people have. I mean, there was a ton of conversation when they had the accident in Tempe and neighboring to Mayor Giles. As someone this is not the opioid epidemic, we can work on that. This stuff that Pete is talking about is the stuff that keeps me up at night. Just because Ohio has 77,000 truck drivers, they lead the country in truck drivers. Number 2 is California. And so if
You
we
don't
don't
think we're going to get to self-driving
absolutely
trucks?
we will.
I think the trucks will come
That's
first,
trucks
actually.
will come first because you can drive a truck then 24/7. You can lock them down, so security would be better. You don't have the driver that needs to rest. So it will. I think that will be the first thing because you can move cross country very easily. And I would say, yeah, I mean the security of them is a very big deal about how they are protected and hacked. But even in that case, we've been having driverless Ubers. Like half of the Ubers in Pittsburgh are automated. I was in one with Mayor Peduto. It was interesting. And all of the self-driving cars you all have in Arizona, which I've seen, and we've had 1 fatality. Compare that to the number of fatalities you have with human error.
Regular cars.
Right. I'm a terrible driver. I'm looking so forward to the day I don't have to drive. And we don't even have, we're like the 3rd least congested place in the country, is the Dayton region. So I think that, this is going to be a really big change for people to get their head around, but also the future of work and what does that do? Because it is happening. Well, Pete is right. We know it's coming. It's going to happen way faster than automation happened in manufacturing, way quicker, and I think faster than humans can really be prepared for.
I will tell you that Mayor de Blasio was going to come, and then he had something else to do. I don't know what it was, but anyway, he was going to talk about infrastructure. So I thought maybe if we have just a few minutes, that maybe you guys would like to talk a little bit about how cities manage to, look at what's happening in Washington. That infrastructure bill has been sitting there moldering for, since the Obama days at least, and probably longer than that. So how does a city deal with a crumbling bridge, or in the case of New York, of course, Bloomberg and company built this subway line. How do you deal with the infrastructure problems that are presented and not being dealt with really out of Washington?
Well, we haven't waited for Washington. I can tell you regionally in Arizona, we are completing the last 2 miles of light rail throughout my downtown. We've added tremendously.
How are you paying for it?
Well, we passed a local sales tax.
Sales tax.
And a regional sales tax. So we're part of the greater Phoenix community. And so 20 years ago, we had a horrible freeway system. It was congestion and it was just a horrible situation. We, out of frustration, our voters passed a regional sales tax that it will sunset here in another 4 or 5 years, and we're already talking about what's next. So again, it's an example of local governments don't sit still because we can't. And so when you can't wait for Washington, D.C., you pick yourself up by the bootstraps and regionally figure out how to do it.
Yeah, we did an income tax in 2016. It was actually a mix of high-quality pre-K for every 4-year-old and paving of roads.
Wow.
Just to let you know, the paving of roads is the most popular thing. So, when it passed by 12 points, people, I think number one, folks trust when local communities say they're going to do something, they know where to find you if you don't. And secondly, they know it's got to get done, and we know it has to get done. And it's unfortunate. It could be much, I think, better served if state and federal government would step in and really create a partnership like we used to have. We call for that all the time. This latest infrastructure bill is one that calls for our money 3 times over before any sort of DC money comes in. So it's like, hey, we're not going to give you any money and we're going to tell you what to do. That doesn't sound like something that mayors would be really excited about. But we continue to have to continue to move forward because we've got to build our cities, and our cities are growing, and that's the place where people want to live.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to us like the administration's plan for infrastructure in cities is the cities do all the infrastructure.
Yeah, you pay for it.
And on some level, that's what we've been doing all along. Part of how we're dealing with this actually is artificial intelligence. So, or more specifically, predictive analytics.
Right.
We've found that we're partnering with a company called Uptake that is helping us analyze the data in our utility, especially our sewers and water utility, to figure out predictably where some failures may take place. We're working with another company called Robotics that has figured out a way to, they basically have these iPhone-type cameras mounted on the dashboard of streets vehicles, and they will literally scan the roadways and help us update our asset inventory and figure out where the cracks are forming and where the potholes are most likely to be. And to me, this gets into the other interesting thing about AI that we didn't get to talk about, which is I would offer that the difference between data and big data is that data is information you gather, you come to understand it, and then you apply it to solve a problem. Big data is information that you gather, you'll never understand it, and you can still apply it to solve a problem. So it's like, if the water project, to do a really reductive example, one of them finds that if you have equipment past a certain age, it's likely to fail. That's data, right? We understand that, and then we go act on it. Some of the predictive analytics could say that if you are in a certain part of town and it's rained in the last 3 weeks and your user base uses a lot of water on Tuesdays, it's more likely to fail. We'll never know why. This is how a lot of Facebook and Hulu ad algorithms work. They don't have to know why in order to work. And the ironic thing is, in that sense, this machine learning resembles ordinary data use less. It resembles human pattern recognition more. So really what that iPhone scanning for potholes is doing is it's mimicking the intuition of a 30-year career experienced foreman on the road crew who can sense but not explain when a road is about to fail. And we need to do things like this to wring every bit of efficiency we can out of the systems, because Washington is not going to send us a lot of help.
Can I ask you to back up just a little bit and talk about one of the things Mayor Pete did when he first got in office was that you said 1,000 buildings in 1,000 days. You would either tear them down or rehabilitate them. How did you do that, and did it work?
Yeah, so our challenge was that because we shrank after that economic shock, we lost about a quarter of our population. When I took office, residents said that the biggest issue on their mind was vacant and abandoned houses. Nobody could tell me how many vacant and abandoned houses there actually were. When that question didn't get answered, that was when all the mayor's office interns were informed that they now worked for code enforcement. I sent them to go count. We spent a year of really nuanced and sophisticated data gathering, figuring out market conditions and house conditions, and then realized that the only way we could actually propel those findings into action would be a childlike goal in its simplicity. So that was when we said, all right, let's do 1,000 houses in 1,000 days. Data transparency came in because we published an online scoreboard. Every day you could see how many houses we'd fixed, how many were torn down, and how many days remained before we would meet our goal. And that was really the key, because the resources were always there, they just hadn't been gathered. What gathered them was the political pressure we put on ourselves by publicizing this goal that would be very easy and obvious to tell if we had missed. And so it furnished that kind of propulsion that we needed. Did it work? Yeah, I mean, we don't have those vacant and abandoned houses anymore, which is great. About 600 of them were removed, about 400 were repaired. There's a successor challenge which has to do with making use of vacant lots that may not, I know this will not compute in New York, but just to give you a sense of how different our housing market is, we have a lot of houses that are unaffordable because their prices are too low. And what I mean by that is, in my neighborhood, you can get a perfectly good house for maybe $50,000, $60,000 bucks. When you go below 50, it's actually really hard to get a loan because it's not worth it to the bank to finance it. And so you got a lot of families that are perfectly capable of fixing up a house, but can't get the credit. And so similarly, it'll be a while before these vacant lots are built on by the private sector at market rates. So we're experimenting with things like tree nurseries that we can use for our parks department, or clover, which is great because you don't have to mow it and it's hypoallergenic. Whatever we can think of to hold the land while the economy grows around it.
Well, that's been a source of great debate here in New York. Some of these empty lots have been turned into these beautiful parks, and then the city wants to use them for housing. So anyway, any other thoughts on infrastructure before we go to our first question? From a Twitter person. Yes, I love it.
Better person.
Okay, Mayor Harp spoke to some of New Haven's initiatives, but can others highlight some of the strategies you use to reduce gun violence in your cities?
Sure. Some of the work that Mayor Harp talked about has been, I think, stolen. Like we say, we steal everyone's ideas around particularly community police action. We have a community police council. Actually, even before some of the issues that had happened in other cities, we had an incident in Dayton in 2010 where a young man broke through the back of a police car, handcuffed, broke the back of the window, jumped out of the window, and jumped off the bridge. And luckily, the dash cam was on, and so you heard him talking to the officer about how, had he ever thought about killing himself, and the officer started to get worried, and you could see the officer say, oh my God, as the young man unfortunately leapt to his death. What was interesting to us during that process was part of our community said, oh yeah, the officer completely pushed him. And so what told us, you couldn't get upset with the community, or you could say, obviously we have an issue here because the trust is so far broken that two people are saying two very different things. And we started to get to work around community police relations. This also moved into the citizen initiative to reduce gun violence that lots of cities have worked with. David Kennedy, for example, we met with him last week with the police chief and mayor's task force to really, dive in to the work of targeting folks that are in either families or groups of families that have a propensity for gun violence, and talking to them about really getting services, and then also saying, look, if we know you have a propensity to use guns in our neighborhood, so you can get services and we can help you get a job and move on past this life, or we're really going to go after it from the particularly in federal court. So those two efforts, I think, have been really helpful, and it has to be systemic. I say it and constant. When we do community police council, we're always looking to see what can we do better, and we have to look at police-community relations just like a marriage. I don't go home and say, oh, I did great with my husband today. I don't have to do anything for 10 years. It's constant work, and that's the relationship with police and community. And it's a constant check to say, how are we doing and what can we do better? Because you can never be perfect on this. And so I think that's the other thing that's really important and in the thoughts of mayors as we continue to work on this issue.
I think a lot of the fatalities related to, well, not a lot, but the significant amount of the fatalities related to gun violence in my community involve officer-involved shootings. And so this is a painful lesson to learn, but having gone through that, as I'm sure all of us have, we've learned that we need to do a better job of training our officers in de-escalation. We need to have specifically trained folks that know how to deal with mental health issues. Suicide by police is something that we are confronted with on a regular basis in our community. And so we are trying to get better at that. But we have I keep talking about my police chief, but he's championing the cause of having better trained police officers. Again, the statistic that bothers me the most about my community, when I started as mayor 3 years ago, we were sending out these young public safety folks 2,500 times a year to suicide scenarios. That was 3 years ago in a city the size of 500,000 people. At a meeting a week ago, I asked about that statistic, and it's now 3,500 suicide calls a year that we're sending young public safety folks out that might not have a lot of life experience or a way to confront how do you solve that problem. So we're trying to get better at training our police officers to de-escalate, to recognize ways that they can respond better to mental health situations.
Mayor Harp, does your police force have body cameras? Do you use them now?
Yes, we just recently, they have cell phones and they have body cameras, and we thought that we had to do it because, you know, so many of our residents have cameras, and they can take a picture from their perspective, and they can cut their camera off, turn it back on, and you really don't know the whole picture. So we thought that just to protect our police themselves, that they should have body cams. And so
How has it worked?
it's been working pretty well. As a matter of fact, some of the complaints that we have had have gone away when we tell the people who've made the complaints, well, we have the film. Would you like to sit and watch it with us? And that's happened, and they've said, okay, fine, thank you very much.
So apparently it's difficult to store do you have a storage problem with these videos?
That was one of the things that we worked out first, is where we would store and how we would store it. I believe that we're storing in the cloud. It downloads, you know, like when the officer takes it off and puts it in, and then it goes to the cloud. And we were able to, from what I was told, come up with a very good financial deal in order to be able to maintain the footage. So we've done that. The one thing that we are doing as well in terms of cameras, we've got cameras all over the city for traffic, and oftentimes we can use that, but almost every one of our retailers has cameras. So we're going to be working on a protocol now to get the retailers to up front say that if there's a crime there, that they will share their footage with the police.
That's great.
The other comment I'd make on the gun issue is, you know, mayors have been leading for a long time around, I think Bloomberg started this as Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and the work that has been done with cities to really talk about this. I think 37 states are preempted, so a lot of us we're preempted from even making laws to protect our community, which is a challenge that we continue to fight and work for. In Ohio, for example, if a city puts any law on the books in Ohio and someone sues us, we're responsible for all attorney fees for everyone. So, so that's the kind of things that the state has done on this preemption issue, which is something that is a really big deal for our communities, because obviously if we had less guns, there would be less gun violence too. So that's something I think that all mayors.
I got a good one for you. The only reason that we can stop you from bringing a gun into the county city building in Indiana is that our building happens to be connected to a courthouse. Otherwise, it would be illegal for me to stop you from bringing a gun into my office.
Yeah, in Ohio, it's pretty tough. Guns are allowed in daycares, just everywhere. So there's nothing we can do as a city to stop that because of preemption rules, which is something that we continue to fight on.
Well, you know, in the elections in New York, you're starting to see this issue bubble up. It's even in the suburbs of Westchester, there's a race going on right now, and a lot of the discussion is about guns. There's a good question, there are a lot of good questions here, and let me sort of pass a couple of them along. Let's try this one. How do you combat gentrification in highly poverty-stricken communities? Who wants to take that one on?
Well, I mentioned that I don't want to take that one on, but gentrification, frankly, is something in ways we aspire to gentrification in our downtown, because right now, gentrification is displacing folks from a community that traditionally have been there, and they get priced out of the neighborhood. That has not been a problem as of yet in my community. But we are trying to, we're fighting blight and we're trying to incentivize more development in our older communities. But at the same time, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've got this great economic development project of bringing the light rail right through the middle of our downtown. So we are confronted with the possibility that if we are successful, that gentrification may be an issue that we need to deal with. And so I think the credit for this really goes to our state housing director for tax incentivized projects, affordable housing projects. There's been a requirement in our community for the last couple of years that in order to qualify for those tax breaks, you need to be within a half a mile of transit. And that has allowed these projects to come in, and now we have a pretty good foothold of every mile or so, and along the light rail corridor, we've got an affordable housing project. So it's kind of, if we are successful in reinvigorating the community, hopefully the framework has been laid for a nice integrated, diverse community of housing along that path.
And I think this issue in the Midwest, my market is similar, maybe weaker than Pete's, okay? So, my neighbor, I live in a neighborhood built in 1922, four-bedroom craftsman's, and my neighbor just bought her house for $38,000. I mean, and it was in great shape, So a woman had moved to the Pacific Northwest because that's where her kids were, and she was selling it. That's what.
Anybody want to move to Ohio or Indiana yet?
Yeah. The issue in our communities is but we still have an affordable housing issue.
Buy a parking space in New York.
I know. Well, we really want you to consider. You can really lay out, and there's probably vacant land right next door where you can have a tree farm in Dayton or South Bend as well, because that is happening. But the issue for us is that people aren't making enough money even to afford that. And so that's the issue for us is not as an affordable housing issue, it's a wage issue.
Well,
and that's the difference, I think, where you can compare the, when we talk to, our friends in California and it's $1 million. I mean, I could never even you'd say $1 million, it might as well be $1 trillion for an Ohioan. And I think that's the difference for us on this affordable
Well, that's
housing.
another good question here about the changing economy and that jobs are being eliminated, and sort of how do you deal with that? You've got to bring in maybe new industries, new companies, new ways for people to work. What are you doing that's different?
Pete teases me. He calls me the dystopic mayor. So I'm not very positive some days on this because I see the change happening so quickly for the Midwest. That it's a big challenge for us, so we do a lot of investment on, that's why pre-K was so important for us and really investing long-term and changing the way people think about education because really this change of having critical thinking skills, regardless if you get a certification, if you go to college, but really being able to recognize critical thinking is so important for the next decade. But I do worry. I think this is the issue, and I'm excited about the work that mayors are doing because I don't think there's enough talk about this, about what the future of work is going to look like and how we prepare our communities for that. Especially in my community, you work hard, play by the rules, your kids are supposed to be better off. And now that's completely being destroyed and changed, and we don't have a good answer yet. And I think that's the work we're really excited to really dig into. And I haven't heard anything where people are like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's not like anybody's figured it out. The trick is, the other side, theoretically, is beautiful, right? The other side is one where we can work, a 20-hour work week and society gets all the goods and services that it needs. There's just less work involved. It takes less work. Problem is how you get from here to there without immiseration and violence, right? So the economists call this transition dynamics. And you go through this short transitional period lasting roughly as long as all of us are alive. And then you get to the other side, hopefully without violence. But we're all living in the middle, right? Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. And so the puzzle is what policy steps could we or should we be taking now? As Nan says, a lot of it's around education, and we got to be careful, especially in our part of the country, how you talk about this. There's a lot of poorly framed skills-building dialogue that basically says, oh, you, worker, are broken, and we're going to fix you with these new skills, and we're going to make you a whole new person. But there's a way to talk about it that I think is more about the empowerment of people to be resilient to all these changes that are happening. What you definitely can't do is put the toothpaste back in the tube. Some of these changes are permanent. And by the way, they don't all have to be bad. I just spoke with a company that purchased a major line in our, it was a manufacturing facility that made Hummers originally in our area. It is a Silicon Valley-based electric and automated vehicle company backed by Chinese foreign direct investment. And they purchased it in turn after a 3-year contract where that facility was making Mercedes R-Class vehicles. If you've never seen an R-Class, that's because they're sold only in China. So I had American union auto workers in our area making German cars going to Chinese customers. But the other side of the coin is the production of these new cars will require radically fewer workers because the facility is so automated.
Right.
So this is a very complicated story with sometimes the winners and the losers are the same people in different stages of their lives.
You're going to get rid of the truck drivers, too.
Well, yeah, and then you add that, right? That's why I get a little worked up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've done, and we're a little city, 130,000 people. Our state sends people to Hanover, Mass. They always look for other parts of our little state that they want to support for companies that want to have a face in the United States on the East Coast. And so I started sending my team over to the International Trade Show. Just this past week, we went to China to sign papers with a sister city there that we have had a relationship with over the years. And we met with companies that want to be in the United States, and they want to be on the East Coast, and we want them to be in New Haven. And one of the things that I noticed when I ran for office the first time and went around to the companies, we have a lot of companies from Europe. We are still cheap labor to European companies. And so it makes sense to me that we look at the opportunities to do research and development and that type of thing for European companies and other companies in our area. And I think that speaks to what Nan spoke about, making sure that we have a population of people who are educated enough to work in those industries. I think across the United States and the world, everyone is looking at life sciences and biomedicine, but you have to be educated more than our generation was educated. Think about it. We educated 25% of the people, and we thought we were doing a great job. Now, 75% or more of people have to be educated, even if they want to go into advanced manufacturing, which, by the way, in Connecticut, there's still plenty of jobs there.
There are a lot. The long-term next decade is the question that makes us worried, because we still, in Ohio, we're producing more than we've ever produced. The output for manufacturing is the most ever. There's just no workers in them. They're all dark. There's not even lights on in them because it's all just completely automated, which is just a big change.
And the other thing that I think is really important, and it's probably not related to this, but it is in my mind, because I keep thinking, this younger generation, millennials, they don't work in offices anymore. They work at home most of the time. And so it really is important that cities then be places that are interesting for these people that have no other social ways to deal with people. They may even have the job, so it's not a question of them doing other things, but they have no other way to interact. And that's going to be a challenge, and is a challenge for all of our cities because of the way that young people work these days.
That's right.
Well, I'm sure you all have the WeWork, where there are a lot of really good questions. Pardon? So there are a lot of good questions here. One question is, how are your cities preparing for mounting natural hazards? I mean, this sounds like a climate change question. And I don't know how you can put that into your thinking, but if you could talk to us a little bit about.
This is pretty immediate.
Had a flood.
Yeah, a couple of floods.
Yeah.
So, first of all, American cities are already on the business end of climate change. You don't have to be a vanishing Pacific island to be dealing with this right now. We had, about a year and a half ago, I went to bed one night. It was one of those, if you're familiar with the Midwest, one of these kind of summer squalls that comes through, lasts about 15 minutes, just gushing downpour, a bunch of thunder, and then it's gone. I went to bed to that sound, and about an hour and a half, I woke up and that sound was still happening. And an hour and a half after that, I was in the Emergency Operations Center tracking how many of our houses were being destroyed by flash flooding. And by the next morning, or that same morning, I guess, we were being told that statistically that qualified as a 1,000-year rainfall event. So you think, okay, well, that's terrible, but we'll deal with it. Theoretically, that'll be the only time in my life that happens. 18 months later, we had an event where it was 60 degrees on a February day, which is not normal in South Bend, and a whole bunch of snow melted, and we had another colossal rainstorm. And the river rose, the river which had actually helped us on the first flood because it was empty at the time, rose and began engulfing a number of neighborhoods, including mine. And we were told that one, depending how you count, it qualifies either as a 500-year or a 2,500-year statistical flood. So either I've got ridiculous luck that in my 7 years as mayor, we've had 2 of these major events, or things are changing. Of course things are changing, right? And I get, as we speak on Twitter, clever conservatives are probably reminding us that climate is not weather. That doesn't mean that climate is not related to weather. And so I think we're having a dialogue where when you look at coverage of climate change issues on news, the B-roll is always pine trees and polar bears and ice shelves calving off something in the Antarctic. But what climate change looks like is the flooded basement of the low-income family that I'm talking to from their porch as their kids are wandering around figuring what to do the night before the first day of school because they just got flooded out of their home. And so we have to start talking about this not just as a question of science, but as a question of justice. Because for whatever reason, invariably, it is the most vulnerable who are impacted most by these problems. There are technical challenges, like how do we update all of our floodplain maps, because I just don't believe a 100-year flood is what it used to be. But it's especially acute for mayors because we're there, so that's who people are going to yell at. It's an act of God, but you don't get to yell at God, you yell at the mayor. And so I faced a lot of questions about why couldn't our sewer system accommodate this? And the answer was you can't build a sewer system that will accommodate routinely a 1,000-year rate. We just can't, we don't have the resources for that. I don't even know if it's physically possible. But mayors are definitely on the hook for results, and so like everything else, we're going to have to figure it out. I don't know how, but we're going to have to figure it out because now the other end, obviously, we're doing all our green fleet and things we can do to be part of the solution on climate. And so the other really interesting thing with climate is how mayors, not just across the country, but across the world, have almost given up on our national governments to do anything about it. And we're just going to get together knowing that we have the population and the economic muscle to be part of the solution, but we're still going to have to deal with the problem.
Well said.
Mayor Giles.
Well, we're winners and losers of this argument. I've been in, the week before I was sworn in as mayor, we had our 1,000-year flood event in Mesa, and there was a neighborhood underwater. On the other hand, there's billions of dollars of investment being attracted to my community because we are pretty boring when it comes to weather. And we are far less.
You only have one season, right?
We have 2.
Oh, okay.
We have summer and Christmas.
Yeah, okay.
But as a result of that, we're a safe place to invest your money because you're not going to have a lot of weather-caused disasters in Arizona. So, but
you do a lot of solar power too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a big part of our economy, and we own our own electric company, so we're heavily invested in solar energy in my community as well. So I know I've had an experience similar to Pete's, but on the other hand, we are reaping some economic benefit as a result of companies that are seeing what happens as a result of weather-caused disasters.
Well, it is interesting that the Mayor Bloomberg that I've been writing about, he's been trying to get mayors from all over the world to get together to agree with to work toward the Paris Accords, even though our government isn't going there anytime soon, it appears. So, okay, let's go to something else. Now, this is, I just want to read this question and do with it what you will. How do you balance the long-term timelines of these problems with the short-term election timelines? Anybody want to have fun with that?
I think all mayors look at that differently. You know, when I was elected in 2013, I came in and said, okay, I have 48 months, right? And I remember some of the staff were like, really? You're like going to think of it that way each month? What did you get done? And so you do think of things just how quickly can you move. So I think that's something great, frankly, about elected office. At the same time, when I was like on council beforehand, I felt like I was always cleaning up something somebody did in 1982 in Dayton, and I was so annoyed. So, you know, while we're moving quickly, I do at the same time think, well, I really want to be a mayor. They look back in 2030 and 2040 and say, gosh, she was really smart and was really thoughtful about that. And so, you know, that's the kind of the way I like to think about the issues that we're dealing with in Dayton. But yeah, I mean, you know, we are all on a clock, and I think that people do demand things, and they should demand things quickly. But at the same time, we have to think long term. And that's really that question is really the challenge of being a leader of a city.
the problems that I'm fixing were problems that were started by 2 or 3 mayors ago.
Exactly, that's always.
And the successes that I'm celebrating are the successes that were the result of the good work of mayors 2 or 3 mayors ago.
Right.
So it's been fun. I was on our city council as in my 30s, 20 years ago. And that's what's been really fun, is coming back to be the mayor now and to say, oh, this is what we were hoping, or this is what we were dreading would happen, as things matured and as the resources came together. So there is a sense of urgency when you're a mayor, because you do know that your time is short, particularly in a state like Arizona. I have term limits, so best case scenario, I'll be the mayor for 10 years, and then my kids and grandkids will get to see if I was good or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I run every 2 years, so if you
She's
think
on a clock.
It's brutal.
And, but I think it really is true that, there are many things that were started by the previous mayor that I'm getting credit for because they were finished in my term. And you just have to keep moving and doing what needs to be done, whether or not it gets done during your tenure or not.
Yeah, I definitely agree that you stand on the shoulders of those who came before you, and you're also finding dead bodies from before, even from the best of mayors, because everybody's selecting what they're going to work on, and other things aren't a priority. I feel like there's a spectrum. I would put journalists on one end, where their impact is often immediate, like in a matter of hours or days or maybe weeks. Find a story and just instantly changes the way people think about things, and you have that readout and reward right away. And the other end of the spectrum is scholars and artists, who I think can have by far the greatest impact of all, but are often dead before it starts to materialize. That's where you have trillion-dollar ideas and you change entire cultures.
this is not the audience to remind them.
I guess my point is, I think an elected leader is in the sweet spot in the middle. Like, it takes us definitely longer than a reporter to feel like we've had an impact on a project that we started. It takes years. But it's also very much within the horizon of your work. I've been surprised at my tender age to find in year 7 I'm getting to be a grizzled veteran by mayor standards. But you see, seeds that you planted 5 years ago or 7 years ago that are starting to bear fruit, and it's the most rewarding thing. Of course, you think about political cycles. We all do. But you have to have a certain level of faith that the only thing I would add to that, I guess it's a little more tactical, is if you got to upset people to do something right, do it very quickly.
First 100 days, for sure.
That's really interesting that none of you has really blamed the predecessor for very much. And you've talked about about working on the shoulders and living off of what came before. We haven't seen very much of that not in New York City, and certainly not nationally. So I don't know. I, for one, really appreciate hearing that, and I guess it's the way of mayors that you can see the long haul there. I have one more question, and I know we're supposed to leave in just a few minutes, but I have one more question. I wondered if each of you could give us one thing that you've done in your city that you would like other cities to do, other cities to share. Nan?
Oh, I was hoping to go last this time.
You want to start at
No,
the other
no,
end?
it's fine. The thing I am most proud of in our city is passing high quality pre-K. For a city like Dayton, thank you. I'm very proud of it. I was at Brookings, we passed in 16. I was at Brookings because some of my mayor friends had told Bruce Katz that he should sit down with me, and he really didn't understand why. He was like, oh, they said that I should see Dayton, which is usually you get a little bit of an eye roll if you're like an Ohio mid-sized city, right? And so I said, well, we passed this pre-K, and I was telling him, he's like, wait a minute, you passed pre-K? Yeah, but 12 points. Dayton did pre-K. Yeah, well, why didn't I hear about this? I said, well, sometimes we're just not big enough to get the attention. And I think that the community to invest in itself in that way for you talk about something long-term, they're not going to see the result of that for, a decade plus, right? And for them to invest in that when most of them don't have 4-year-olds, I think is something that just makes me so proud of our community. Now, I'd like the state to do more on pre-K. I'd like the federal government to do more on pre-K, because it needs to be all across the board instead of just in some specific cities.
I have the same story as Nan, really, because I'm the son of an elementary school principal. And I remember growing up, I couldn't tell you who the mayor was or who the city council people were, but we knew who all the superintendents and school board people were. And that's what my community was known for. We were an education-based, that was one of our core values. And so, of course, as the mayor, I frankly have zero responsibility for the school district. I'm not one of the cities that has that responsibility. But that's where my heart is. That's where my passion lies. That's where I think is the biggest challenge that my city faces is challenges to the trend of education in my community. So that has taken up a remarkable amount of my time and energy and passion, is working on education issues. So like Ann, I hope if I do have a legacy that it's tied to a school readiness program that we've initiated in partnership with our school district and using the city resources that we have. I'm hoping that it's a model that other communities are going to be able to learn from our mistakes and that it can be replicated in other communities. Similarly, we're trying to apply innovation at the pre-K level and at the post at the higher education level as well. We're trying to get an Arizona State University campus in our downtown. I've been a big advocate for that. So, and I see them as being very much the same issue. It's just promoting education, even though it's not technically my responsibility. My responsibility is to see what is the issue in my community that needs the most help and use the resources of government to address it.
So I think that I shared with you the Community Youth STAT program. I'm really proud of it because we've been able to identify the 600 kids who are disengaged, who fail to thrive, but we've also engaged community providers on behavioral health, mentors. We have a veterans mentoring program that, we think that veterans have a lot in common with people who've been in gangs, and they can relate back to them. And they mentor these young people, they help them become successful. And we've been able to pull all of these things together through a local entity called Graywall Software. And they came to us, they do our emergency management software, and they also do software for airports, but they retrofitted that software so that all of these people who touch the lives of these young people can jointly plan in a chat box on behalf of these young people in real time. And so that we're able to interact with these young people in real time and intervene. And as a result, our expulsion numbers have gone down, our suspension numbers have gone down, and we've been able to create programs that reinvest in this specific population and gets them reconnected to something that's positive and productive in their lives.
I downplayed earlier the extent to which we're a college town, but actually one of the things I'm most excited about is I think we're redefining what it means to be a university community in some ways. We've hit on a way to do it that I think evolves past what I would call College Town 1.0, which is where the community basically thinks of its college population just as that, as population.
What college was that again?
What's actually, we've got 5. So there's Notre Dame, St. Mary's, Holy Cross, IU has a campus in Bethel. And so it's a very rich texture of different kinds of colleges and universities. But there's this temptation to treat them as warm bodies, right? And so you just have this population and you think about how they affect you just as residents, right? They might have an impact on your housing market. You might be busting their parties. It's things like that. When really they're not the same as any other large institution. It's not the same as if you had a hospital or a major manufacturer in town because of the substance of the things that they work on. So our challenge is to put the substance of the things they work on to work for the city. So not just, we're very happy when they come volunteer at the soup kitchen, but to be not just the service project. We've got students in civil engineering who are in one of the most economically challenged neighborhoods in the city, helping to remediate an environmentally impaired underground tributary. And in the process of doing that, we're getting their free labor and intellect, but we're also, I think, equipping them better. So that the two-way test of a great college town, one, is the college better off, is the community better off that the college is there versus some other large organization, but also, is the college better off because it's in this city and not some other place? And if we can offer that, I would say there are the sort of comparatively obvious departments where you can wire up these interventions, right? If you have a school of architecture, urban planning, law, journalism, those are pretty clear. Then there are the non-obvious departments, philosophy. Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh engaged philosophy department to help structure the process for searching for a police chief because they think about deliberation and contemplation for a living. Right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So finding ways to do this, I think, is really a new frontier in the way colleges and communities can work together, and I hope that it continues to spread.
Well, this has been great. We have to wrap up now, and I don't know about you, but I could sit here for at least another half an hour. And, But you know, watch these mayors. You can tell they're superstars and they're on their way up and they're doing wonderful things with their cities. So let's give them a big hand.